Stifter, welcome in without the Kroeder Kroghen. And the first thing I have to do is to apologise for the state of my voice. I'm a anwus uthek warna. I have a terrible cold, so my sincere apologies. Today's programme is going to concentrate on poetry. Not always a popular subject, but I hope I'll manage to introduce you to something about poetry in Cornwall without terrifying you or boring you too greatly. And I also need to give you details of the Gonis Eglos Nadelik, the Christmas Cornish service. I got that wrong last week, I'll try it again. The Christmas service in Cornish, which I didn't actually give you details of last week. And just in case you want to get a pen and paper handy, at the end of the programme, I'll be telling you how to say Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in Cornish, and you might like to write that down to put on your Christmas card. Poetry is a minority enthusiasm these days, unfortunately, although the tradition of poetry in Cornwall is very long and strong. In fact, the major part of our literary heritage in the Cornish language is poetry. The Cornish Ordinalia, the plays, were written in verse. Passion Agonarlus, that great poem, The Passion of Our Lord. Bernard's Mariajac, The Life of St. Mariajac. These old Cornish texts are poetry texts by and large. And of course, Cornwall is the homeland of Charles Causley, who by any standards is a poet of international repute. Another poet of not quite the same repute, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but nevertheless a very interesting poet, is Brian Tuck of Redruth, who's published several books of poetry now, 8 volumes, and a 9th shortly to be published. And I asked Brian the other day whether, in view of the fact that poetry is now such a minority enthusiasm, whether he felt that he considered himself to be a popular writer in the vein of Charles Causley or Pam Ayres.
No, I don't quite see myself as a popular one in the way that Pam Ayres is. I mean, I like her poetry and I like her reading it, but I don't see myself in that category. Now, I admire Charles Causley very much, and I wouldn't mind perhaps being in that category. But my subject matter seems to be quite different from either. I don't really seek to be a popular poet, but it's always nice when people do read your work and comment on it and say how much they like it. I mean, I think we all like a little bit of praise and a little bit of encouragement in that way, yeah.
And what are you working on at the moment?
Well, the book that's due out next month is mainly to do with the visits to churches that we've made in the summer. My wife and I are doing sort of a project on Cornish churches. We've done 107 to date, and some churches inspire me more than others. Also, I've written a poem about the Gorsedd, and branched out on 1 or 2 things that perhaps are not so Cornish, but of course they deal with people's feelings and emotions. So the new book coming out is a step perhaps in a new direction. It'll be interesting to see what people think about that.
And do you know yet what that book will be called?
It will be called More Poems for Cornwall and Redruth, because Redruth still is one of my main inspirations.
And your home?
And my home, of course, yes.
Your long poem about the Gorsedd, perhaps you could just give us one of the verses describing the Gorsedd ceremony itself.
Yes, well, this is where we line up to go on to the field for the ceremony. Blue lines paired by alphabet, but hearts move as one. My partner, a lady wise in the Celtic tongue. The veil of inward self opens, and all eyes share. The blue and green-filled world for us is everything. There is standing, a coach ride. It passes as a dream, slow movement, cobbled stones, beasts with crumbling shields, floating banners, antlered dares in stable shadows. Past and present interweave, and sun covers all. It glows from the blue-robed bards as a circle forms. I wait with gold and black-barred headdress cradled safe. The harp's notes and Cornish words stir the mighty pine. Anthony's 23 windows glow with pride.
Thank you, Mura. Brian Tuck of Redruth reading part of his poem about the Gorsedd. One of the finest and most poetic stories ever to come from Cornwall is, of course, the Tristan hag Iseult, the Tristan and Isolde story, which is genuinely Cornish. It centres around King Mark, who is the king of Cornwall, and Tristan, his nephew, who is sent to Ireland to bring back Isolde, or Iseult, to marry Mark. On the way, unfortunately, Tristan and Iseult drink of a potion, a magic wine, which makes them fall in love with each other, and the tragedy of their love story then follows. Well, there have been all sorts of variants and versions of this story, including Wagner's, of course, but there is a Cornish language version of the poem, which has had a rather interesting history. The first part of the poem was written by A.S.D. Smith, Caradar, but unfortunately he died before the work was completed. And then the last sections of the poem were completed by David Watkins, a Welsh student whose Cornish bardic name was Carar Brynio. He lived from 1892 to 1969, and he finished Tristan hag Iseult. It's a wonderful piece of work. Here's a short extract from the early part of the poem where Tristan and Iseult have drunk the magic potion in the wine. You'll hear the phrase, Anguina asud droclam, that wine, what a misfortune it was. The extract is read by George Ansell, and it's taken from the tape I mentioned recently, Flows Hafernes, published by Agantavas.
Na moi heb anten niges lis na joina creu, an gwyn cyfrynnig yn siwr, a gan victernes siwr uwch a zetio dalchin. An gwynna, asio droclam, o ffydius ddim gan sa fam I ddol, chwarae man rolen dis had y marc, dyn a hen. Ota castan eich cael lir, a riga gwari warna'n styr, ebra debel dewetho. Rhaid hi reifus yn gwyn, chandia yn dra nilyn, a droch a dde yn oddo.
Changia dra nilyn ha droch a dde yn oddo. Change the thing we cannot, and evil will come of it. It's a great poem, great story. Now, the tradition of publishing poetry in Cornwall, of course, is as long as the music and art tradition in Cornwall. And I have in my possession a wonderful old collection, which I'm very pleased to possess, called A Cornish Chorus, which was published in as long ago as 1948, the year I was born, in fact. It contains some wonderful things. It was edited by Muriel Hawkey and had a preface by J.C. Trewin, and also has some of his poetry in there. Here's an example of one of the pieces in it. This is by A.S., and it's called The Estuary, King Harry Passage. Time has no power in this tranquil place. Here nothing stirs save where the restless tide retreats, returns, changes its fickle mind, and bears again the rocks it strove to hide. Midstream the circling ripples slowly ebb, change to a green stillness, reflect, display a passing bird, trees at the river's edge, the quiet sky, and the twilight end of day. The anthology, which is probably quite difficult to get hold of now, is full of beautiful pieces, especially pieces describing the extraordinary Cornish landscape. My favourite pieces, I think, are those by Crosby Garstin, poems concerning and set in the Isles of Scilly. Well, there have been other anthologies, of course, as well. The latest, or one of the latest, is Cornwall in Verse, edited with an introduction by Peter Redgrove, and that's a Penguin anthology and contains some marvellous pieces. But before my cold-laden voice sends you entirely to sleep, here is a very professional, well-known voice reading an extract, or reading the whole of, but I'm just going to play you an extract from Thomas Hardy's famous poem At Castle Bottrell. I'm sure you'll recognise the voice.
As I drive to the junction of lane and highway, and the drizzle bedrenches the wagonette, I look behind at the fading byway, and see on its slopes, now glistening wet, distinctly yet myself and the girlish form benighted in dry March weather. We climbed the road beside us as we had just alighted to ease the sturdy pony's load, when he sighed and slowed. What we did as we climbed and what we talked of matters not much, nor to what it led. Something that life will not be balked of without the rude reading till hope is dead and feeling is fled.
The late Richard Burton, of course, reading Thomas Hardy's At Castle Bottrell. Peter Redgrove's anthology for Penguin, Cornwall in Verse, also contains a couple of Thomas Hardy poems, but here to end today's programme is a short poem by my ex-teaching colleague Frank Ruhrmund, who writes principally about Penwith and now makes his living, having retired from teaching, by writing poems and also articles for the Western Morning News and other newspapers and magazines. This is called Porthcurno and describes a most unusual event that obviously touched Frank a great deal. Of all unlikely things, on a dying blackberry afternoon on a beach, unmarked grave of the late gales of summer visitors, where a shift in the sand exposed back bones of cable, skeleton in the Atlantic seaboard. 4 men and a machine in Coast Guard blue pulled a bull from the sea. A very drowned, beautiful bull. And, of all unlikely things, they did it gently. Well, that's it for today, except that I did promise you details of the Cornish language church service for Christmas and how to write Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in Cornish. So if you've got the pen and paper ready, here we go. Gonis Eglos Nedelic of St.Ives in Eglos Vethodis St.Ives Augusta Liscaris. A Christmas service entirely in Cornish of 9 lessons and songs in the Methodist Church at St.Ives, near Liscard, at 3 p.m. on the 20th of December. 3 p.m., 20th of December. A purpenia pur welcome henne. Now, Merry Christmas in Cornish is Nadelik Lowen, N-A-D-E-L-I-K, Nadelik Lowen, L-O-W-E-N, and a Happy New Year, Ha Blithen Noeth Da. Ha, H-A, Blithen, B-L-Y-D-H-E-N, Noeth, N-O-W-Y-D-H, Da, D-A. Nadelik Lowen, Ha Blithen Noeth Da. And so I'll say to you all, as well as saying Digenachui, God be with you, goodbye, I'll say to you for this week and next week, Nadelik Lowen, Ha Blithen Noeth Da. Digenachui.